Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. New York, bright morning. Sunlight streamed through the large bay windows of the Sterling Hotel, illuminating the marble floors and sparkling chandeliers. In this luxurious setting, Emma Johnson moved with her cleaning cart, silent, methodical, invisible to the hurried and arrogant guests. That morning, Richard Lawson, a businessman known for his arrogance and power, entered the lobby. His eyes scanned the space with an air of superiority. He noticed Emma absent-mindedly wiping down a table near the reception desk. With a dismissive gesture, he pointed at her and said, in front of all the employees, "You call this work? Even a child could do better." Emma, without losing her composure, slowly raised her eyes. She felt the other employees gaze on her, a mixture of embarrassment and concern. Yet she said nothing. She had learned that dignity was better than anger, and that every humiliation contained a silent lesson. Richard, satisfied with his effect, turned on his heel, convinced he had mastered the situation. But what he didn't know was that Emma was no mere cleaning lady. Her inner strength, insight, and intelligence would soon make him realize that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. In this shining hall, under the indifferent gaze of customers and staff, a lesson in humility was about to take place. The day had barely begun when the lobby of the Sterling Hotel was already buzzing with the usual hustle and bustle. Emma pushed her cleaning cart with precision, ensuring every corner gleamed beneath the majestic chandeliers. She moved silently, avoiding the gaze of hurried guests and employees too busy overseeing their own tasks. It was at that moment that Richard Lawson reappeared, his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't even look where he was walking and lightly bumped into Emma. Without apologizing, he stared at her and said haughtily, "Watch your step. You can't do your job properly, can you?" The other employees looked away, uneasy. The usually silent lobby seemed to hold its breath. Emma gently put down her rag and raised her head. Her gaze remained calm, but beneath that calm exterior, a mixture of anger and pride simmered. She knew that responding with aggression would only fuel Richard's vanity. She smiled slightly and answered in a calm, almost gentle voice. "I assure you everything is under control, Mr. Lawson. If you wish, I can check this area one more time." Richard burst out laughing haughtily at the customers who were beginning to notice the scene. "Control?" he said, shaking his head. "You're pathetic. I pay millions to keep everything running perfectly, and you're supposed to clean it up." Emma bowed slightly, silently. But this bow was not one of submission, it was that of a woman aware of her worth, who would never let an arrogant man dictate her dignity. At that moment, something subtly changed in Richard's eyes, even if he didn't realize it. Beneath his arrogance and mockery, there was now an involuntary interest, a quiet astonishment at Emma's calm and self-possession. And in that luxurious lobby, as Richard picked up his phone again to appear busy, a silent duel had just begun, that between arrogance and dignity. The next morning, the Sterling Hotel was even busier than usual. Guests arrived with ever more extravagant demands, and the staff rushed around anticipating every whim. Emma, as usual, moved calmly with her trolley, organizing her mental schedule so as not to forget anything. Richard Lawson, still in his impeccable suit, entered the lobby, visibly rushed and preoccupied. A mistake had just occurred in the organization of a crucial meeting, an important file had disappeared and the conference room technology was refusing to work. Panic began to show on his face, and the attendees scrambled to find a solution. Emma, noticing the scene, intervened with surprising calm. She approached quietly and said, "Mr. Lawson, if I may, I can help you restore order in the room. I've seen how the system is set up, and there's a quick fix." Richard stared at her, a mixture of surprise and disbelief crossing his features. He wasn't used to someone of his lower rank daring to speak to him like that, let alone propose a solution. But, pragmatically, he agreed. "All right, go ahead then," he said, a little hesitantly. Within minutes, Emma had resolved the technical issue. The meeting began on time, and the assistants and clients present were impressed by the young woman's speed and efficiency. Richard, for his part, remained silent, his ego hurt, but a part of him was strangely intrigued. As he left the room, he glanced furtively at Emma, who continued her work as if nothing had happened. There was something disconcerting about her calm and self-possession. For the first time, Richard Lawson felt that the person he had ridiculed the day before was no ordinary person. And so, what had begun as a public humiliation slowly transformed into a silent recognition of Emma's competence and strength. Richard didn't know it yet, but his arrogance would soon encounter its first real lesson in humility. In the days that followed, Richard Lawson couldn't help but notice Emma. Every time he passed through the lobby of the Sterling Hotel, he saw her carrying out her tasks with surprising precision and efficiency. She cleaned, organized, and anticipated problems before they even arose. What intrigued him most was her absolute calm, even in the face of the most demanding guests and the most stressful situations. One morning, when a famous client complained loudly about poor service, Emma intervened gently but firmly. She resolved the situation without raising her voice, and the client left visibly satisfied, forgetting his initial complaints. Richard, watching the scene from the lounge, felt a pang of admiration mixed with shame. He, accustomed to everyone bowing to his authority, was witnessing a quiet strength he could not control. Later that day, Richard found himself stuck in a broken elevator with Emma and 2 other employees. During the minutes of waiting, he observed her behavior. She calmly reassured her colleagues, mentally organized her next steps, and showed no sign of panic. For Richard, this situation revealed a striking contrast to his own usual behavior. In every interaction, Richard realized that Emma possessed a practical intelligence, intuition, and quiet leadership ability he had never suspected. He began to wonder how a housekeeper could be so organized, so competent, and so dignified, despite the humiliations he had inflicted on her. This silent observation marked a turning point in Richard's mind. A part of him, one he hadn't yet admitted, was beginning to question his hasty judgments and habitual arrogance. Emma, unknowingly, was teaching a valuable lesson to the hotel's most confident businessman. And in the shadow of this nascent admiration, a subtle tension took hold, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and intrigue, announcing that the events to come would upset Richard Lawson's certainties. A week later, the Sterling Hotel hosted a prestigious charity gala. The guests were among New York's most influential figures, and every detail had to be perfect. Emma Johnson, as the event's logistics coordinator, discreetly oversaw the preparations, checking tables, controlling lighting, and handling contingencies. Richard Lawson, guest of honor at an awards ceremony, entered the lobby, elegant and confident. But tonight, he couldn't ignore Emma. When a waiter tripped over a messy cable, Emma intervened immediately, restoring order with a precise gesture and a calm voice. Richard, watching, felt a pang of admiration. At the end of the evening, as he was heading out for a speech, Richard stopped beside Emma. He stared at her for a moment, unsure of what to say. Then, in a voice he intended to be polite but which betrayed his astonishment, "I have to admit, you handled it all really well tonight." Emma looked up, surprised by the unexpected sincerity in his voice. She replied with a slight smile, "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. This was an important evening, and I wanted to make sure everything went smoothly." This brief exchange changed something. Richard felt that his usual arrogance had no effect on her. He could no longer simply ridicule her to feel superior. There was something magnetic, almost intimidating, about her calm and poise. In the days that followed, Richard found himself watching Emma more often than he intended. Every polite smile, every thoughtful gesture reinforced the impression that behind her position as a housekeeper lurked an intelligence and strength he had never recognized. This first contact, however brief, laid the foundations for a budding respect. Richard understood, for the first time, that underestimating Emma Johnson had been a monumental mistake. And that evening, a secret admiration took root in his mind, an admiration he didn't yet want to admit. A few days after the gala, Richard Lawson expected to find Emma in the lobby, going about her usual business. But this time, it wasn't just her calm demeanor and precision that caught his attention. He learned from one of the hotel's assistants that behind her discretion lay an incredibly competent and committed woman. Emma didn't just clean and organize spaces, she helped improve staff efficiency, proposed event management solutions, and even took part in charity projects supported by the hotel. She organized collections for disadvantaged families, oversaw youth programs, and inspired her colleagues to be the best they could be. Richard, hearing all this, felt a mixture of surprise and shame. How could he have judged a woman by her position and appearance, when she possessed talent and intelligence that far surpassed those of many executives in his company? Later, he watched Emma calmly explain to a new staff member how to handle a complex situation with a demanding client. Her gestures were precise, her voice soft but assured, and her natural authority commanded respect without the need to shout or threaten. Richard realized that the humiliation he had inflicted on her was nothing compared to the strength and dignity she embodied. That day, Richard realized something he had never considered before: true power lies not in money, status, or arrogance, but in self-control, intelligence, and resilience. Emma Johnson, whom he had ridiculed for no reason, had just given him his first lesson in humility. As he left the hall, Richard glanced at her discreetly, a mixture of admiration and guilt. For the first time, he knew he was going to have to rethink everything he'd ever believed about others, and himself. In the days that followed, Richard Lawson found himself thinking about Emma more often than he would have liked. Every interaction with her stirred an uncomfortable feeling: guilt. He was beginning to realize how unfair his arrogance and snap judgments had been. The woman he had condescendingly ridiculed was turning out to be not only competent, but also admirable in her humanity and resilience. One morning, as he walked into the lobby, Richard overheard employees discussing Emma's effectiveness on a fundraising project for underprivileged children. The voices were filled with respect and gratitude for her commitment. Richard, sitting in his office, felt a pang in his heart. He had thought he knew a person's worth based solely on their role and appearance, and he had been wrong. Later, during an impromptu staff meeting, Emma calmly and tactfully resolved a delicate situation involving a disgruntled customer. Richard, witnessing this mastery, felt his own arrogance crack. He realized that the humiliation he had inflicted on her was not only unfair, it was indicative of his own blindness. This realization forced him to reflect on himself. How many times had he judged others hastily? How many talents and strengths had he disregarded out of sheer vanity? Richard felt genuine shame, but also deep respect for Emma, who continued to shine despite everything. For the first time, he knew he would have to repair his mistakes, not by simply apologizing, but by changing his way of seeing and acting. This error in judgment marked the beginning of an inner transformation, and Richard Lawson began to understand that some lessons can only be learned by humility in the face of those we underestimate. A few days later, the Sterling Hotel held an internal conference to recognize the most deserving staff members. Richard Lawson, always accustomed to shining in public, was preparing to deliver a speech on leadership and success, confident in his authority. But what he didn't know was that Emma Johnson was about to become the center of attention, in the most unexpected way. As Richard stepped onto the stage, he spotted Emma, intent on the technical management of the room. Suddenly, a minor incident occurred. A projector was flickering dangerously, threatening to ruin the presentation. Without hesitation, Emma intervened efficiently, restoring the equipment and calming the panicking technicians. The entire room watched in awe. Richard, taken aback, realized that all eyes were now on her. In a gesture he had never anticipated, he publicly declared, "I want to acknowledge the exceptional work of Ms. Emma Johnson. Her skill, speed, and professionalism averted a disaster today." A silence ensued, then warm applause erupted from the room. Emma, dignified and calm, bowed slightly, accepting the compliment gracefully. She didn't seek to humiliate Richard in return, but her presence and efficiency spoke for themselves. Richard felt a mixture of humiliation and admiration. For the first time, he realized that his past arrogance had been not only unfair, but laughable in the face of Emma's competence and dignity. He had underestimated a woman he once considered insignificant, and this mistake had just been publicly exposed. This public recognition was a turning point. Richard Lawson understood that his status and money were no match for the moral strength and intelligence of a humble but brilliant person. Emma, however, continued her work with the same focus, silently proving that true greatness lies not in title or power, but in integrity and competence. And in that room full of light and admiring murmurs, Richard Lawson began to transform, slowly but surely. After the conference, Richard Lawson could no longer ignore the reality: Emma Johnson was not just competent, she was exceptional. Every time he saw her handle a complex situation, solve a problem, or reassure a colleague, his admiration grew. But this burgeoning respect was also accompanied by a subtle embarrassment. He had to admit that he had been deeply unfair to her. One afternoon, when a VIP client made a difficult complaint, Richard watched Emma handle the situation calmly and precisely. She spoke gently but firmly, guiding the client toward a satisfactory solution while maintaining everyone's respect. Richard felt a pang of envy mixed with admiration. He would never have been able to act with such poise in this situation. Later, he approached her, this time without arrogance or judgment. "Emma, I wanted to apologize for my past behavior. I was ridiculous and unfair. You have my admiration." Emma looked at him calmly, her eyes reflecting a quiet wisdom. She replied gently, "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. It's never too late to admit your mistakes." This conversation marked a turning point. Richard began consulting Emma on certain decisions regarding the hotel, realizing that her advice was invaluable. He discovered that her ideas were clear, accurate, and innovative, and he could no longer doubt her competence. Little by little, Richard's attitude changed. He stopped criticizing, he listened, and he learned. The other employees noticed this subtle but significant change. What had begun as humiliation transformed into mutual respect. Emma, for her part, continued to demonstrate professionalism and dignity, inspiring those around her to excel. For Richard Lawson, this evolution was more than just a lesson in business. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and recognizing the value of others, regardless of their status. And in this change, he discovered a side of himself he had never explored, the ability to learn and grow from those he had once despised. A few weeks later, the management of the Sterling Hotel announced a major decision. Thanks to her professionalism, intelligence, and commitment, Emma Johnson would receive a significant promotion. She would now be responsible for coordinating all of the hotel's events, a key role that showcased her talents and leadership. At the official announcement, Richard Lawson stood up and spoke in front of the entire staff. "I would like to congratulate Emma Johnson for her exceptional work and dedication. She has demonstrated skill, patience, and leadership at a level we have never seen before at this hotel. Her promotion is well-deserved." Thunderous applause accompanied this announcement. Emma, moved but still dignified, bowed slightly and thanked management. She knew that her promotion was not only a recognition of her work, but also proof that perseverance and dignity always triumphed in the end. Richard, observing the scene, felt a newfound pride mixed with humility. He understood that he was no longer the man who thoughtlessly judged and humiliated. He now had an ally, someone he deeply respected, and who would continue to inspire and guide the team with excellence. In the following days, Richard consulted Emma on several important projects, seeking her advice and taking her recommendations seriously. Their relationship, once marked by arrogance and humiliation, had transformed into a partnership based on mutual respect and trust. Emma, for her part, continued to work with the same rigor and commitment, knowing that her value was now recognized, and that even those who had despised her could learn and evolve. Thus, this chapter of his life marked a turning point. The initial humiliation had given way to a quiet but powerful victory, proving that dignity, competence, and resilience are forces that nothing can break. A few months after Emma's promotion, the Sterling Hotel was running with remarkable efficiency and harmony. The employees had a greater respect for their work and were inspired by Emma's example, while Richard Lawson had changed profoundly. His arrogance had given way to a genuine humility, fueled by admiration and respect for a woman he had once ridiculed. One morning, as they were both passing by the hall, Richard stopped beside Emma and said with a smile, "You know, Emma, I learned a lot from you. I thought I knew everything, but you showed me that true greatness is not in money or power, but in courage and dignity." Emma looked at him calmly, a slight smile on her lips. "And you've learned that respect must be earned, Mr. Lawson." I'm glad you understand. Their relationship had evolved into a bond based on mutual respect. Richard often sought her advice, listened to her suggestions, and admitted his mistakes without pride. Emma, for her part, continued to excel in her work, inspiring those around her with her perseverance and wisdom. What Richard Lawson had thought was a simple lesson in politeness and professional recognition had transformed into something deeper, the ability to question oneself, to evolve and to value those who had long been ignored or underestimated. And in the bright lobby of the Sterling Hotel, amidst the glittering chandeliers and the bustling customers, a simple and powerful truth emerged: humiliation can be the starting point for transformation, and dignity combined with talent always triumphs in the end. Richard Lawson was no longer the same man. Emma Johnson had not only earned the respect she deserved, but she had also awakened in him a new humility and wisdom. And together, in this new equilibrium, they had created an environment where competence, respect, and integrity were finally the true values of success.